Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Virginia Commonwealth University. It's December 4th, 2009, and this is another version of Meet the Methodologist. And it's my pleasure to have this opportunity to chat with two of our visitors who are here today giving lectures that will be offered as part of our CARMA Consortium webcast program. We have joining us and participating Ken Bollen from the University of North Carolina and Deborah Bandalos from the University of Georgia. Ken, welcome.
Thank you.
Deborah, good to see you.
Thanks.
So we'll start out. I'm interested in the basic question of how it is that you got interested in research methods, and you both have many accomplishments and expertise in structural equation modeling, and I'm interested in how you got interested in SEM as well. So we'll kind of randomize the order here. Ken, you want to start off?
Sure. I guess I cycled back to methodology. I started as an undergraduate with a math major, and I got tired of the abstract nature of it without any sense of application. So I switched into sociology as a major with math as a minor, because you could see applications, of sociology. Then I guess the next transition was in graduate school at Brown University in their Department of Sociology. And we had methodology courses that really, at least one or two, that really demonstrated the applicability of statistics to study sociological or social science problems more broadly. And that piqued my interest in it. So I would say the graduate school experience with seeing the application of statistics to answer a lot of social science questions. As far as structural equation models, I guess I would mark that in graduate school as well. In 1976, I went to the ICPSR summer training program in quantitative methods, and they had a brief sort of overview course of what was called covariant structure models. I have to say I was incredibly skeptical of the technique and the methods with that, but I was intrigued enough that in '78, I guess it was, I went to a short workshop with Carl Jorskog and Doc Sorbonne, and had a long list of my questions of where I was skeptical. And in the course of that workshop, just going over question by question, Jorskog did a great job. Very calm, matter-of-fact way, and say, well, yes, we don't really have it quite developed for categorical observed variables, but I have a student who's working on that at that time. That was thanks to Mutane. Mm-hmm. He's making good progress, with that, and just right on down the list. I felt he had just terrific answers for it, and that really piqued my interest. Coupled with the fact that at that workshop I had bought data from my dissertation that was looking at how to measure political democracy in countries. I had analyzed these data backwards and forward as part of the dissertation research, like any graduate student, and thought I knew it quite well. But when it came to apply the structural equation modeling techniques, the factor analysis, to these data, they were telling me that my model didn't fit. I presented as if it was a single factor. And with all the traditional exploratory factor analysis things, it looked wonderful. But then to have this method to tell me that there was some problem with it, my initial reaction was skepticism of the method, figured that something was wrong with the method, not with my thinking. But after I calmed down, on that, I realized that, well, some of these measures are relying on subjective assessments, and some of these measures are actually coming from the same judge, so this could create some lingering association if this judge has some bias in it. And sure enough, as I entered those things, I found a much better fitting model, and I thought, well, here's a technique that's telling me something more than I knew with the other procedures. And so I think that kind of launched it for me.
Yeah. Debbie, how about you?
I guess I'm sort of the opposite of Ken. I came into, I don't have a strong math background, and I didn't really take much math as an undergraduate. I had a real non-traditional undergraduate career, So it wasn't until graduate school that I even learned anything about research methods and statistics. And I was in a counseling program, and I remember being sort of frustrated because we spent a lot of time talking about our feelings and how we thought about things, and I felt like, well, I'm just such a concrete person. I felt like, well, I'm not really learning anything specific. And then I had to take statistics as part of that program, and I really liked it. I sort of had an affinity for it right away. And I was actually recruited into the research methods program at the University of Maryland by the department chair then. And as part of that program, we had a course in structural equation modeling, and it was taught by my advisor, Jerry Benson. And she had met Uraskog at some point, and she actually had him come to campus. And I remember sort of the same experience. We asked Uraskog a lot of questions about the method, and I was really impressed with him. But unlike Ken, I wasn't skeptical of it, probably because I didn't know enough to be skeptical of it. But I think also because I just sort of naturally think in terms of models. That's how my mind works. I think of things as systems. And so structural equation modeling's just really meshed with that perfectly for me. So I think that's really how I got interested in it.
My next question is, do you have a favorite research methods course or a quantitative course that you took while a grad student, and if so, why that particular one? Since you mentioned that course, let me ask you, was it that course for you, or was there another course?
I did really like that course, I have to say. It kind of opened up a whole new world for me. But I also remember really enjoying my measurement theory course. Because I had never really thought at that time about, to question these scales that are in everyday use, or the fact that they may not really be valid, or, that just sort of, I think as with a lot of students who are first introduced to that, it sort of blows your mind that we're using these for high stakes decisions, and, maybe they're not all that great. So yeah, the measurement course I also remember really liking.
Yeah? Ken, how about you? Did you have a favorite course?
If I think of graduate school, I guess the one that comes to mind is it was my last year in graduate school, and there was a course offered by a political scientist named Doug Hibbs, and it was a basic linear regression model, but taught from quite a good econometric text, Johnson's Econometric Methods. And he was really quite a good teacher, a sharp wit, which made it entertaining too. So I would commute from Providence up to Cambridge, for that course once a week, and it was an audit, and he just let me audit it, and no official registration. Maybe I shouldn't say this on tape. Nonetheless, he was kind enough to let me in there, and I felt that it was he did a great job with that.
Yeah. So do you recall any particular challenges that you faced in learning about statistics or methods as a grad student?
Certainly had to work at it. To this day, I have to work at it. I think it. For me, the challenge is first understanding the material, and then trying to figure out how I can present it if I'm teaching it or writing about it. How I can present it to others in an understandable way. And so it's this thorough kind of attempt to digest this material and then just reconstruct it in a way that I think would make it more accessible and less trouble than what I had, when I was trying to understand it.
Yeah. Debbie, how about you? Any particular challenges that you recall in your methods and stat courses as a grad student?
I guess I would say kind of the same thing as Ken there. Because I didn't come from a strong math background, I sometimes had problems with just terminology and symbols at first, and learning that whole new language. But also, it almost seemed to me like there was a different way of explaining things. Like once I got the concept, it seemed so obvious and almost simple, but I had a hard time getting to the concept. Sometimes I felt in my classes as though the objective of the professors was to keep us from finding out what the concept was, rather than to explain it to us. But I think it's a difficult thing to do when you actually have to teach this material. You realize that it's not always easy to explain the methodologies clearly, because some of them are pretty complex. And so you have to, I think just what Ken was saying, you have to basically break down the concepts and then resynthesize them in a way that you think makes sense.
To switch gears a little bit, you both obviously have a lot of experience as a reviewer of research methods and structural equation modeling papers. And I'm wondering if you could comment on some of the most frequent limitations or shortcomings of papers that you review. Deborah?
I'd have to say that a big problem is that people often tend not to write very clearly. In a lot of cases, I find they have good ideas. They've done an interesting study, but from the get-go, the point of the study isn't clear, and they haven't done a good job of explaining what they did. So I really think that writing is a problem, or, the biggest problem that I see, and not just technical things like you do see grammatical errors, and people don't follow APA style, which is what my journal uses, but just clarity in writing, really.
Mm-hmm. Ken, how about you?
I guess what I would see in the writing, as well as in students and sometimes other faculty, is this tendency to dichotomize that they're sort of working in a substantive area and then working in a methodological area. And I think one of the beauties of the structural equation models, and the real attraction to me, is that it synthesizes those two. It's not like these are two separate processes, and there's just this set of mechanical rules you should follow when you're using structural equation models, so that if this fit index is above this cutoff, then you're okay, and then you do this, that, or the other. It's the lack of attempts and understanding of how to integrate these things, that it's not just a set of mechanical procedures, it's an extension of your substantive work, your substantive ideas, and your substantive ideas should be integrated into your model, that you're presenting. And I just find this tendency to just shut off a switch, like when you're in a methods course. You don't bring the substantive knowledge there at all. It's just a whole series of rules and the rest of it. And when you're in a substantive one, you don't think about the methodological implications you were learning in the other course, common research design problems, this, that, and the other. So I see that as a problem in both the written as well as some of the teaching.
Ken, do you have a sense of how you have evolved as a researcher and a writer based on some of your early career experiences?
Yes, I knew very little about publishing when I had my PhD. A story I sometimes tell my students is that when I was just finishing up graduate school, I had submitted something to American Sociological Review, and in our discipline, that's the flagship journal. And I had gotten back a letter that said, sorry, we can't accept this thing, but we would like to give you an opportunity to revise it, but there's no guarantee, that this will be accepted. I saw that, I thought, they rejected it, and they're not particularly interested in it, so I did nothing with it. Only later to realize that this is a revise and resubmit, which is, a foot in the door.
Right.
So that certainly was a lesson learned.
Yeah. Debbie, how about you?
Yeah, that's funny. I think that a lot of people go through that. Like, you actually expect them in the letter to say, revise and resubmit it. And nobody ever actually says that. So you never know what to do. But I have to say, yeah, oh gosh, I hate to think, how naive I was when I first graduated, because I didn't really know anything about publishing, and I didn't, I'd taken all the coursework and all, but I hadn't had a chance to sort of integrate everything that I had learned. So I was still fairly naive in a research aspects as well, because I think it takes time. I think it's unusual in a graduate student to have them be able to synthesize all the information they've learned and be sophisticated in the way that Ken was just talking about, by combining substantive theory and methodology in studies. I don't think that typically happens when you first graduate. Certainly, it didn't for me, really. That's why I really resonated with what Ken said, because I find that students do the same thing, which is why, if they're doing a project, I make them write out a hypothesis for every path they put in the model, to make them think about, well, why are you putting this path in? Things like that. But yeah, I have to say that for me, I realized that I didn't know very much, like I didn't know enough, or I didn't feel as though I knew what I needed to. In fact, my first job, I think a lot of people go through this, I kept expecting them to come and say, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. We didn't really mean to hire you for this position.
So as you work through a paper, let's say you've got an idea and you're starting out on the paper, working to get through the completion of that first version of it. And then as you go through the revision process, do you think that you do anything different now based on the experiences that you've had as compared to when you wrote your first paper?
Probably, but pinning down exactly what I would do differently. Maybe you have better knowledge of what should be in there and what shouldn't. Maybe a little more balance on how much time to spend on the different issues. Maybe that. What comes to mind is when I teach my structural equation modeling seminar, the major requirement is a paper at the end of it. And as I describe it to them, I say, look, this is a lopsided research note. You're going to have far more details on the method. If you're doing a substantive paper, far more details on the method than you would normally have in a substantive paper. Yet I still see some of these students, when they're writing up their papers for other courses and that, they'll have too much on the method. So sort of finding the right balance. Yes, you still have to do that. You still have to do all these careful checks and diagnostics and the rest of it. But in a substantive paper, you can't take the reader through all of the things that you've done and say a little bit about each of them. You just have to give a very brief summary, maybe in footnotes or elsewhere.
Debbie, how about you? Do anything different?
Well, of course, I have a lot better idea of what reviewers are going to be looking for in a paper now than I did when I first started. But I think probably the main thing is I have a really short attention span, and I've learned that over the years. And I used to try and sit down and get everything perfect in the paper, like completely write it in one sitting. And now I realize that that's not a good way for me to work. And I spend a lot more time just thinking about a paper. Like I might start writing and then wait a few days, and during those few days, obviously I'm not thinking about it the entire time, but I find that I do spend a lot of time thinking about how different aspects of the paper go together, how I should organize it, and things like that. And then when I sit down a few days later to write some more, it just comes right out, because it's almost like subconsciously I've written the paper in my head. I don't know if that works for everybody, but I found that's how I work best.
So based on these experiences then, do you have any particular advice for young scholars that are getting started with their research careers that you think might help them be more successful? Ken?
Well, I think identifying faculty or other researchers who you like the way they work, the way they approach things, and trying to work with him or her is a great way to sort of an apprentice type of relationship. See if you can get some collaborative papers and do it a couple of times so you see exactly what goes into it. I think that's quite helpful. There are some places now, like my own department, where we have teaching courses, so that the students can learn about what goes into teaching. I would certainly want to take advantage of that. I certainly would want to try to teach a course or two of my own before I get onto the market. And I say these things because I had none of it. You know, I did not have any teaching course before I started teaching. And as I've already explained, I was pretty naive about the research process and submission to journals. So ideally, I'd like to see programs directed toward this apprenticeship type relationship and also providing formal training and teaching.
Debbie, how about you?
I agree completely with what Ken said. When I look at younger researchers now that I think are really impressive, they universally have had a really strong mentor. And I think that's so important, to find someone that you can work with and who can basically teach you all of these things that Ken and I are saying we didn't really know. But not just that, to learn how to conceptualize research problems, and to learn how to judge, the importance of different research questions that you might address, because I think that's a difficult thing as well. Like, is this really worth investigating? And just somebody to bounce ideas off of, and to talk back and forth.
So do you have a particular favorite research methods or statistics book that either influenced you greatly or upon which you rely regularly and draw it off the shelf for your research or for your teaching?
I guess I would go back to the one I mentioned earlier, Johnston's Econometric Methods, 1984, McGraw-Hill, New York. That particular version. It was a very formal presentation, very clearly laid out assumptions. And so I used that quite a lot, and I felt it was very helpful in my training.
Debbie, how about you?
I can think of a few. I teach measurement theory, and I like Nunnally and Bernstein's book quite a bit. I used to read that just for leisure reading sometimes at night. I really like McDonald's measurement theory book. He's actually got a really dry wit. I find myself laughing out loud sometimes when I'm reading his book. And I'm not just saying this because Ken is here, but I really like his SEM book. I refer to that all the time.
Now I'd kind of like to ask you to step back and reflect and take a big picture perspective. And my question is, do you think there are topical areas within the field of research methods, or particularly within structural equation modeling, where the methodologists are doing either a particularly good job of investigating things and providing guidance and recommendations, or particularly bad areas where we're missing the boat on some things? Ken, would you like to start?
Sure. I guess I would say on measurement models that people are building, there's insufficient attention given to the fundamental necessity of explaining what the concept is, giving a theoretical definition of what the concept is you're trying to measure, how many dimensions there are to the concept, some defense of why these indicators that you've chosen to use might relate to these different dimensions. Now, it seems so basic, but I think it's rare to find a discussion like that. I think you can find many articles where they'll talk about a particular concept, but nowhere in the article will you find a particularly clear definition of that concept. And it's not because everybody agrees on what the meaning of the concept is. It's probably because there's not agreement. They want to avoid the issue. So I think just clarity of concept, definition, and how it relates to the measurement model the person has built.
Debbie?
I think that's true. In fact, I'd say in my SEM class that I think the majority of the problems in most models come from a lack of good measurement. And I also feel as though in a lot of cases, people seem to think that the purpose of doing structural equation modeling is to get a model that fits. And, the purpose of it is not to just force something to fit. The purpose is to understand the relationships among the variables. So I find that's a good problem, that's a big problem, because instead of paying attention to the diagnostics and the things that might help them to understand what's going on with these variables, people just do things to make the model fit that may or may not make any sense.
Mhm.
It's almost like the divorce between the substantive and the methodological aspects that Ken was talking about earlier.
Mhm. How about on the technical side, for the scholars that are doing research on the technique itself? Do you think that there are areas where the quantitative people are pursuing the right things, or other areas where they're missing the boat on things? Not just the substantive side, which is kind of what you just commented on, but more of the technical side of things.
Aside from some work that Ken and a few other people have done, there hasn't been a lot of work on diagnostics,
Mhm.
both on the front end, sort of, detecting outliers and that kind of thing. Like, people tend to sort of ignore that, I think. And also on the back end, I guess you'd say, once a model has been run, obviously we have these modification indices and things, and they're, you certainly could argue overused, but it's certainly natural for people to want to figure out what's wrong with their model if it seems as though something is. And we were talking about this last night. There isn't really anything that could tell you that sort of unequivocally can lead you to what the problem is. And I don't know really if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because ultimately that has to be a theoretical decision. But that is an area in which I think we're sort of stuck.
Yeah. Ken?
I would agree that there's a need for a lot more diagnostics for these models, so I completely agree with that. Another point I guess I would raise is, in some ways, self-serving, I suppose, but the dominant estimators that are used in these models are called full information estimators, and what they do is estimate all the parameters at the same time. If you have the correct model, that's a good thing, because there might be some efficiency gains to doing it that way. But as we were just saying, most of the time we don't have the correct model. And the consequence of estimating everything at once is that some mistake you may have in equation 12 is going to create bias in equation 3, even if equation 3 is perfectly fine. And so over a while now, I've been doing work on limited information estimators in the two-stage least squares family. And the advantage to these is that they're better at isolating the impact of structural misspecifications in your model to the equation in which that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I really think that we should be giving more attention to those estimators in and of themselves, as well as a way of comparing to the full information ones, because one way of revealing specification errors is if you get very different estimates with one of these techniques versus the other. This is another good way of testing how correct the model is. So I guess less exclusive reliance on full information type estimators.
Mm-hmm. Debbie, could you describe the origins of and give a brief summary of the lecture you're going to give this afternoon as part of our webcast program?
Sure. Of course, I'm going to be talking about basically model modification and focusing a lot on these modification indices, because I think they're used, probably overused, and not with enough thought to theory. And I think most people would probably agree with that, at least methodologists. There's not been as much research as you would think in that area. Actually, Bud McCallum has several papers, and there's been one or two others, I think, but I can't think of any recent papers. So in what I'm going to be talking about today, I basically summarize that research and then try and demonstrate some of these problems with little simulated data sets to show, what can happen and how you could reach the wrong conclusion using those indices. and then maybe how they could be helpful in some situations.
Yeah. Ken?
Sure. My topic will be on what are latent variables, and what I'll be doing with this is giving some of the major definitions of latent variables that are in the literature, and then showing some of the shortcomings of those, and then proposing an alternative definition of latent variables that I think functions a bit better than those other ones.
Okay. Moving back to the personal kind of arena, the question is, do you do anything special to draw inspiration or motivation for your work? It's like when maybe you're looking at the hump, but you can't get quite over it in terms of getting engaged in some particular scholarship. Is there anything that you do that brings energy and inspiration to that process?
I look at the work of other people that I admire and read recent articles or even older, sort of what I consider classic articles, and that always makes me think, gosh, this is so great what they've done. What, I need to get busy and work.
Yeah.
I turn to another project. If I get stuck, I've got so many things going that I just will go to something else and then hope that I'll get some new idea or some new way to work on the original one.
And then finally, what are your favorite parts of your work and the least favorite parts of your work?
Research-wise, or just
in your job as a faculty member at at any university?
Grading. Grading is a very hard process because sometimes you're dashing. I mean, people have expectations that are high. The pleasant aspect is if somebody does a job better than they thought, then that's rewarding. But when they do work that's they think is quite good and there are some problems with it, it's a very hard thing to deal with. But the others, I think we have a very privileged occupation in what we're doing, the ability to investigate these things and try to understand how the world's operating. It's just a wonderful thing to be able to do, and I still get excited by a lot of my research projects and the research of others.
Debbie?
Yeah, I'd have to say that we're pretty lucky in the jobs that we have. There's not a lot of people who can spend their time learning, which is basically what we get paid for, and helping other people to learn. I can't say that I'm crazy about grading either. I don't guess anybody really is, but besides that, there's really not a downside, I don't think.
Well, I certainly appreciate for the both of you taking the time from your busy schedules as the holidays approach to make the trip to Richmond and participate with CARMA. We're looking forward to your webcast lectures this afternoon and appreciate you sharing your thoughts in our Meet the Methodologist session. So,
Well, thank you, Larry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.